Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Stephen tried not to show his mother how worried he was about her. There was an unspoken agreement between them. He does not torment her with his pity, pretends that she is healthy. She lets her neighbor's nurse come over, even though she pretends it's completely unnecessary. They also discuss future plans as if they have decades ahead of them. After all, with mom's disease can live a long time. They just need to save up for the operation. And yet every time his mother put her hand to her breast, she seemed to be unnoticed by the sudden pain in her heart. He wanted to run up to her, to protect her, to grab her in his arms as his father had once done, and carry her away from their sad and shabby apartment, where the portrait of his father with the stunning smile was set in a black frame. I'm 27 years old now. I'm a grown man, and I could do something about it. That's what the skinny young man of unassuming appearance thought. Only his brown eyes and prominently protruding chin gave him away. Chin gave him a real fighter who fought for the right to survive in this harsh reality. The rest of his appearance made him look like a child who had grown up too soon, or a sad elf who had been kicked out of his warm and kind world by some evil creatures. But the wiry arms and legs with steel muscles showed that he could stand up for himself. Sports as a child were not in vain. Thanks to his father. It was thanks to him that he never stopped training for a single day, except for the day when his father was buried and the days when his mother was taken to the hospital with seizures. During the rest of the time, despite the fact that he worked a part-time job in a cab and taught classes at a children's school of mixed martial arts, he performed the same set of exercises every day. In the first place, it was his father's precept. Secondly, he couldn't become one of those old coaches with a gutless face, who whispered about the need for the will to win. Kids don't listen to you if you advise something phony. What's there to say? They hardly listen to anyone, but they copy your behavior. That's why you can't cut yourself any slack. Stephen, where are you going again? His mother's voice interrupted his thoughts. Tell me, what are you up to? Why are you going to Tumen for your ears? Mom, not for my ears. Christopher will give me his almost new Niva. I'll take the tourists to Tobolsk for a tour instead of him. And I'll bring you a red one and a piece of paper. The guy spoke, winked at his mother, and said in general, the usual hack work. I'll be back tomorrow. You won't have time to miss me. Adriana to check on you, the son added and blushed thickly. He knew that his mother did not like the neighbor nurse, and not even because she had confirmed that her disease existed. She just didn't like her for some reason. Stephen was afraid she'd forbid him to invite her over, but his mother turned the conversation to something else. The usual hack work, you say, look, you'll follow your father down a crooked path. He was a good man, though, God rest his soul. Well, he's too much of a species. Mother hastily crossed her son and sighed, sat down on a shabby stool with paychecks, and put one hand on the other. We ran from time to time client. Mother's given up a lot in the last 2 years. What was she like? Thin and tinkly. Always joking. She held her own. Then all of a sudden, it just snapped. The first serious change in her was after her father died the second time. A couple years ago, he couldn't figure out what was wrong. He was in a hurry to get her surgery, hence all the potboilers. But he didn't want to tell his mother how worried he was, so he just joked out loud. Well, you see, if we're a honeyed father, he spent all the trouble on himself like a real man, and left us a happy life. Or I didn't remember my father well, even though he died when he was 12. But first of all, my father was always traveling. Secondly, memory, as if saving him from pain, gradually displaced the image of a loved one. Sometimes I was afraid he couldn't remember anything at all. His memory stole from him time after time. Valuable details, precious little bits of memory. Here's his father patting him on the shoulder when he came back alive. Caught in a thunderstorm at the age of 5. And the gesture forbids his mother from getting hysterical. And here he is showing him the new block, and that afternoon they fix the car together. And then they drink tea with sugar in spite of it. Every moment is like a jewel in a second. And when memory steals those jewels one by one, you want to cry. But no matter how hard his memory tried to deprive him of his memories, He was sure that his father was a mountain for him and his mother. And as for his poverty, as his mother put it, he simply did not succeed, and he or will succeed. After all, children should be better than their parents if he loves them. And he loved his father, and he still loves his father. He's gonna keep earning, no matter what his mother said or how much she talked him out of it. The hack job really wasn't very hard. Twice a week, he substituted for his friend Christopher and worked on his car in a cab, taking passengers on a personal excursion from Tumen to Tobolsk. The pay was very good. For one day, he earned sometimes more than for a week's work on his rather shabby car. In economy class, he was saving money for his mother's treatment. She had a hypertrophy heart, and even though she was just over 50, the doctor said, "As cut off your mother's heart as a 60-year-old." She had to have surgery, put in a prosthetic heart valve. Even as a child, it was believed that she wouldn't last long with a congenital heart defect. No one believed she would survive. Not Betty's childhood friend, not her maternal grandparents. Believed only he and his father, and for their sake his mother lived and lived, except that she gave up after John died. So she affectionately called us already with whom she met in school and did not part until his death. We never complained, but Stephen could see that she was getting worse. The sum required was huge, about several hundred 1,000, and it would still need money for a separate room and recovery. But he's a man, he'll manage. His father John had taught him boxing and self-defense. I showed great promise, and you even wanted to take me to Chanty Mancy's with full payment for room and board. There was a kind of sports boarding school there for especially talented children from low-income families. My father was happy, and they had already planned a trip to the rich and distant Canty. But when Stephen was 12 years old, his father was gone. It all turned out stupidly. He was invited to his birthday by an army comrade, with whom they served together in the paratroopers. People were saying that his former classmate and co-worker Robert had become a big man in Surgut. They even said that he was friends with criminal authorities. But when his mother told him about all this, Stephen's father only laughed and joked in farewell that you have hung us. Surgut is a big city. It's not our little village. See, Robert will help me. He and I are like brothers. We'll move to a bigger city, and we're renovating my mother. She'll be even prettier and younger. But how could she be better? Dad laughed. We didn't like his friend Robert. He periodically gave his husband some strange jobs, after which he brought back too much money. But he always came back sad, brooding. Kathy didn't need the damn money. He could work as a gym teacher like he used to. Let the salary is small, but the case is useful training kids. And where else? Strength, contusions, and periodically aggravated deafness, and you'll get a job. Sometimes it often fails. He failed again, nods. She's not even 40 yet. Aloud, she said to her husband, "Please, John, don't go. You know what you're like, don't you? In short, if there's a problem, you're in trouble. You should thank me and apologize. I had a dream the other day that your dead mother was waiting for you at Robert's anniversary party, and you're little. You're running to her in a suit and a white shirt. Don't go. You'll see for yourself later. How could I? You don't understand, we don't do that. Our other guys will be there too. He sent me the tickets and paid for the hotel. You remember, don't you? He's a great guy. I always go back. I remember, your mother said, your Robert's cool. He's cooler. Always climbing up to the top, hanging around rich people. It won't do any good. And you know the rumors about him, don't you? Come on, baby, don't get too excited. Do we have to live in sadness?" The father easily picked up the mother in his arms and took her around the apartment, humming a song I know only a hang glider can help. It will help me. Mother laughed sharply and smiled in his arms. I was glad my father was happy. He didn't know the hang glider. Such was the nickname of a friend Robert from the fact that in his youth he looked like Rick. He's gonna kill his father. Just a few days later, just a week later, my father was walking the burqa and hang glider to the car after leaving the restaurant. And although he was quite tipsy, you can't forget old skills. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a suspicious shadow flickering on both sides, which hid behind the neighboring cars. He with one throw fell a friend near the Bobitio and fell on top. And around them, they were already firing from the machine gun. as told later, who came to them with his mother and father's coffin. A broad-shouldered bald man with a potato nose, offensively poplar lip, and swampy green eyes. Well, you see, that's the thing. I was completely under the fly and could not see anything around me. I couldn't even open my eyes, so I just had to keep them open. And then your John hit me in the face and knocked me down, and I didn't have time to realize anything. And he's bleeding to death. The hang glider waited for some words from his dead friend's wife, but she seemed to freeze. So he decided to continue the story. But she managed to shove me under the car and closed the space with her body like a cork. They're shooting from the front of the Jeep and from behind, and my car was against the wall. So I'm lying there like a cave and I don't move. What can I do, Uncle? You figure it out. He blew his nose into a huge plaid handkerchief and added that those masked men wanted to set the car on fire, but to send me to the other world for sure, and I was drunk and not even afraid. I just thought about it. Now we'll celebrate the two of us going to the other world. But not fate, not fate. My guys had already caught them. Anyway, we avenged your John. Nobody got away. What's my point? Move to my place in Surgut. I'll buy you a new apartment. You want to go to any other city? We'll start with a clean slate. I'll be like your uncle. I won't quit your job, and we'll send your club to the county section. John told me. He's got a lot of promise. Uncle Robert said something else and said something else, and Mother was silent and said nothing. But Stephen remembered nothing further. He shook, choked back tears, and suddenly his body felt cotton. The last thing he felt was the back of his own head hitting the painted wooden floor with a thud. And the next thing, he fell into a series of endless nightmares in which men in black masks and carrying machine guns ran from all sides. They crawled on all sides like snakes and stung with bullets. Stephen kept wanting to cover his father. But for some reason, his father was standing in the middle of it all, winking cheerfully at his son. And next to him stood a real angel with huge snow-white wings. He was wearing his father's award watch and tapping on it, signaling that it was time for him to get ready. His father wanted to shout something to him, but little Stephen could not hear it. He would have given anything to know what his father had said to him. But now, to find out, he would have to live a long life. And then they would see each other, and he would know everything. With such thoughts, the suddenly grown-up boy woke up. Then, on the third day in the hospital, it turned out that his father had already been buried, and he did not have time to say goodbye to him. Stephen wanted to talk to Uncle Robert and learn more about what his father had said in his last days, and in general, how they had served together, how they had gone to school together. But his mother said icily, "Stephen, you know how much I love you, but you will never see that man again. God is his judge. But from now on, we'll never speak of him again." And that was the end of that story, and he and his mother's life changed dramatically. There was no more kindness from him. Dismissing and joking father who could explain in just a few sentences the most complicated thing in the world. He had that gift. I don't think I said anything special. You feel warm at heart, as if the stove was heated on a day when a blizzard howls outside the windows, and you carry these words and a kind smile of your father all day long. And nothing scares you. Only this love and kindness is real, and the rest is just silly ghosts. You can get through any hard day when you have a mom and dad, and they love each other and you. I woke up from my memories and realized it was time to go and make some money. I just have to tell the nurse next door, Christopher, to stop by and see my mother. He understood that the flirtatiously flirtatious neighbor had a thing for him. He also realized they'd never be together. It's nice and all right, but it's like lizards, sitting on a rock, basking. Beautiful in their own way, but infinitely alien to the reptile. If a shadow falls on it, it'll run away and you can't catch it. Only the tail remains, but he's not a millionaire. And for $500 a day, no one else will look after his mother. Even if you only have to come in a couple times a day and give her shots, not sit around all day. And then he told her straight up, "Adriana, I'm sorry. It's not going to work out. I'm a straight shooter. If you're taking care of your mother to bond with her, I should tell you that up front. Makes it easier on you and me." But Adriana just acted, slay eyes twisted in place, and said, "What do you mean?" Neighbors should help each other. Sure, I like you, but I can get over it if things don't work out. Then she burst out laughing with a strange alien laugh. That was the end of the conversation. They never came back to it again. But since then, Adriana had stopped passing him closely in the hallway, trying to touch him with her whole body. And no peeking into his room before he left after his mother's Coke with the question, well, you won't miss me, will you? Maybe you'll come in for a cup of tea. His mother didn't like him, thought she was a slippery girl. But Stephen put it all down to maternal jealousy and thought it was better to have such supervision than none at all. Immersed in his thoughts, he did not notice how in a flash he rushed to Tumen, picked up 2 willy-nilly, but quite adequate Muscovites, and took them to see Tobolsk, their temples and monasteries. They were pooping merrily in the cars. All you could hear was Moscow. Yeah, listen. But it didn't annoy him. They must have been dumped in western Siberia. It also cuts the Muscovites' ears a bit, but they bear it calmly. Stephen did not share stereotypes about cities or nationalities or even customs. He tried to see what kind of person was in front of him. It made life very easy and helped him to look at the very essence, discarding all unnecessary garbage, thoughts, and words. He didn't want to turn into some worldly, resentful uncle who blamed someone else for his failures, whether it was the government, people of other nationalities, or people from the capital. And I had nothing against rich people. Everyone is responsible for himself and lives as he knows how. As he approached me, he saw some brazen type who was rushing along the highway like a madman. Every now and then a little bit of sideways oncoming traffic. Or did I want to slow down? I knew from experience that only life teaches fools, and for a long time. But from behind there was a tractor, which was also in a hurry, though it drove carefully, too fast. The Jeep in front wanted to pass on red before the intersection, but suddenly a hard car jumped into the intersection. The driver braked sharply and backed up a bit for some reason. So he crashed into an almost new Niva, which a friend had bought only 6 months ago specifically to attack. Luckily, the friend had put a homemade kangaroo in the front. A kangaroo made of real steel. Although he could have been fined for it, but his brother from the traffic police would have helped out. So nothing thanks to the metal protection in front, only shook a little. But the rushing Jeep got a serious dent. As Stephen mentally called Stephen Driver Rag, turned out to be a tall man, elegant gray suit, and noble glasses. Except that his chalet-like grin did not bode well. It was immediately clear that for the last 20 years, the uncle had always considered himself right and the others guilty. Not a good man, cowardly and dangerous. Stephen thought to himself, "What's up, kid? Write the address, phone number. I suggest we deal with it nicely." And I realized that the rules of the road for the man do not count. So I said, as emotionally as possible, "Now we'll call the insurers, we'll sort it out." Curly and sophisticated man poured with blood, and it became clear that he is not 40, as it seemed at first, and all 50 on the face as immediately marked wrinkles and teeth. He fiercely snapped, "Listen, kid, what's your name?" "I'm a young man, aren't you?" The young man. He knew that in such situations one should behave calmly and not give a reason to the interlocutor to explode the dump inside himself. I could sense that the handsome man had a lot inside. It seemed that no one had entered into a male discussion with him for a long time. The handsome man hissed through his teeth, "I'm your big problem, probably for life. Anyway, here's the deal. You call this number and bring me 5 grand greenbacks within 3 days. Or are you going to jail? That's where you learn. That's where you prove yourself a fool." Stephen looked back at the passengers. The Muscovites squeezed fearfully into the back seat. But they were perfectly all right. He reasoned that he would call this uncle later and try to talk to him without ponces. Maybe he puffed himself up like a turkey because the passengers were looking at them. No need to cause his friend any more trouble. So he silently took his business card, took out his cell phone, dialed the number of the man who had a cell phone in his pocket. "Keep me in your contacts and see you later," said the kid, and was surprised at his own calmness. Yes, work in a cab does not go in vain. It teaches restraint because there are all kinds of people. Of course, he had had conflicts before, but this man was furious. His face instantly turned livid. He spat and for his misfortune hit right on the couturier's jeans. With a soft right fist, the guy put a stop to their conversation, and Kevin suddenly settled down on the side of the road. Already sitting on the road, he suddenly pulled Stephen's legs, and the guy also found himself in a horizontal position. He's a beauty. He was throwing punches, which Stephen regarded as forbidden, so he would have had to seriously injure the curly-haired man if a car with some broad-shouldered men in suits hadn't rushed up and dragged the owner of the Jeep away. The uncle got a little bump on his Stephen, but not too much. You could see that Kevin was tugging. That's how you often get into a lot of trouble for nothing. He was grateful to the square, apparently to the guards of Mr. It could have come to serious self-mutilation. He wasn't afraid of himself, but to send a man to the other world, even if it was such a pathos turnout, did not want at all. Add 0 to the amount of the debt at the end of the sacked his handsome man, and added something else obscene. It was clear that he couldn't swear. He put the words in a sentence so inappropriately that the son of the literature teacher smiled and thought that one should be able to express oneself foully too. Then Stephen shook, once again looked at the business card, which showed that his big problem was Kevin Smith. Yes, the last name is not suitable, grinned is not cheerful, thoughts the guy, and methodically took the guests on a tour. And by evening, he brought them back to Tumen. They did not discuss the conflict at all. They only helped him to treat his wounds. He didn't expect anything more. If the guests from the capital had called the police, it wouldn't have done any good. Judging by Kevin's behavior, the circus would have lasted longer. Then he just as calmly dropped off his friend Christopher. His party kept to compensate for the crumpled chicken coop. Suddenly he began to question, but Stephen only waved it away with the words, "It's all right. The guest is fine. It's nothing." A spoiled lunatic on the road crumpled himself and took offense at me. Christopher realized by the look on his face that it was useless to ask further and mumbled, "Well, call me if there's anything I can do." But there was no point in involving him. My friend had 5 children, little less, and on the way was about to appear the 6th, so there was enough to worry about without the illusion. Late at night, the guy came home. He would call Kevin tomorrow. He would probably not be able to talk to him anyway. Today, all his strength was spent on just finishing the excursion and not to show that he was on the verge and was about to fall off his feet. His back ached terribly and there were huge bruises on his legs. He hadn't been badly bruised yet. What was left? He couldn't cancel the tour, could he? After all, in such a business, word of mouth is the main advertising. He had to make a discount from his share for the inconvenience. So he made nothing today. The rest went on gasoline and chicken coop repairs. Well, he hasn't lost anything yet. Except now, this guy wants 50,000 greenbacks. Hehehe, dreamer. Or have I never seen that kind of money before? Anyway, people should have dreams, even if they don't look very human. There will be sunny days. He fell asleep with these thoughts. His mother was studying in the next room, but as usual, she didn't ask him anything. She had a flair for his troubles, and when she sensed the clouds were gathering, she pretended nothing was going on. It wasn't until the next day that she carefully started talking and asking around. In the morning, the young man was awakened by a phone call. "Hello," he answered, without having time to see who was calling or what time it was. "Well, boy, where is the money for our chief? Is he already offended or what?" "Japan's dough. He's out of his mind. It's 50,000 greenbacks for auto repair. The clock is ticking. If anything, it's day 3. Call here tomorrow or you'll be the enemy. Where will they help you make the right decision?" But he did not have time to ask why he should suddenly be put in jail. Without introducing himself, the owner of the chicken voice hung up the phone. Not a few hours later, he was already talking to his buddy and foster brother Rick, who used to work in the police, but now went on free bread and tracked down, as a rule, mistresses on the order of wives. Privately paid better, and there was no risk. Rick had lived with his mother for about 7 years when his grandmother died, so there were no secrets between them. They were family. "Yeah, Stephen, did you fly seriously? Your Kevin revolves around ex-cops of high rank, but the ones who sold out to the locals for the rule and the gentlemen set up their own business, so to speak. Simply put, laundering money for the owners. So, Kevin, your favorite son of the main man who runs everything there, his name is Sam Smith, and he solves all the problems of the local administration. One of the two who survived the 90s is from our town. The other has long since departed for warm islands. Uncle Sam is kind of a patriot and devoted himself to his homeland. Stephen clarified, "You're kidding." Brother still has the power to joke. Rick was surprised and explained that Uncle Sam has a file on everyone and everyone is afraid of him. His son is a cranky fool, puffed up like a turkey, and has no brain at all in his curly head, but only does what he does to quarrel with everyone and threaten. Gone, apparently, to his mom, who's all about plastic surgery and clothes. She's never done anything else. The important thing is to make sure you don't get a stupid car. They can do that. When you say your last day to make the right decision, tomorrow's your last day. That's bad, bro. Rick turned blacker than a cloud, other like a raven in a downpour. Then suddenly perked up and said, "This, my friend, I have a friend with connections, so to speak, in the criminal world, Zia. But if he can help me in any way, I'll let you know. But if I can't do anything, no offense. I'm just a private detective. I take pictures of old ladies with their mistresses. In short, I'm a photographer, an emesher, a guardian of women's fears, nothing more. And I only call myself a detective. Okay, Rick's gonna roll over and there's a gingerbread truck on your street. One serious client will come along and you'll pick up the slack." He and Rick tried to make a joint detective agency in Tumen. And things were starting to work out pretty well. But 2 years ago, Mother got worse. She had to return to her village. Rick came back here too. It was too expensive to rent an office in Tumen. And he couldn't buy an apartment there either. And spending all his earnings on renting a place to live and an office was a stupid idea. That's how they came back. What to do? Life adjusts the most daring dreams in the most daring way. And in what direction? It takes years to figure out. Maybe things will turn out for the best in the end. They hit it off and nothing else happened that day. As usual, a few cab orders at lunchtime and a little more in the evening. Mother started prying in the evening. What happened? Or how you went yesterday? Didn't say a word about the bruises and bruises. It was nothing. Mom, it's okay. Stephen wanted at least this day not to explain anything, because he didn't understand anything yet. But his mother went on the attack. "Son, tell me, what happened? Did you get a call at 6 o'clock? It was a wrong number." He fought off the onslaught of his mother's overpowering concern. Boyfriend. That was the end of the conversation. We knew him too well. It was useless to continue the conversation. Too clear and metallic were the son's eyes today, and his chin was resolutely set forward. The boy went outside to clear his head and get something to eat in his mother's car for tomorrow. He'd said he'd eaten in the cafeteria, but in fact he'd made do with sandwiches and tea in a thermos. What do you do if you still have to walk around under the table? Never saved any money that way. On the way back, I ran into Adriana, the nurse next door. Yes, as always, she was brightly dressed and wearing makeup. Red dress, green coat, stiletto boots, and blue-black hair. In curls today, no give or take. The picture's all neat and tidy, like a pussycat. Only a black pussycat runs across the road and it's gone. I caught myself thinking like that. Caught myself, boy. And I didn't even expect to meet you, smiled Adriana. How could you not expect? The guy thought to himself, who knew how she looked out for him when he drove up to the house and ran in full parade to the only store nearby. And out loud he said, "Adriana, I'm sorry, I gotta run now. I owe you something else." This morning he gave the usual $500. But sometimes his mother needed to buy some medicine, so he paid retroactively. "It's all right. Kathy's wonderful. She's no trouble at all. I'd babysit her for free, but you know what I mean." Adriana smiled coquettishly and continued, "We girls have our expenses too. But as soon as I have a rich husband, I'll stop taking money from you." Well, here we go, Stephen thought. Adriana worked as a simple nurse, but constantly portrayed herself as an ultra-demanding lady, burdened with suitors. She always told, as if casually, that about a single neighbor from the top floor, who is ready to throw at her feet a single room in a new building, or about the widower of a patient, who is bored alone in his cottage in the city limits, and apple trees in the orchard on 10 hectares. Sometimes the stories featured madly in love interns or former classmates who still cannot forget her. In the mythical world of Adriana was even the chief doctor of a luminary from Moscow, who dreamed of leaving his wife and throwing an apartment in the center of the capital at her feet. Although the guy was young, but he was an observer and knew this type of women who really almost believe in the invented by themselves a huge line of admirers outside the window. The boss wished him a happy 8th of March, just like the rest of the female employees. That's because he's supposedly in love. Conductor. Squeeze passed on the bus, and he was struck by Cupid's arrow. The janitor stopped sweeping when she passed. He admires her beauty. And all these stories, such ladies pour into any vacant ears. After they marry, nothing changes. Alas, all their lives they see only themselves. Of course, Adriana doesn't need him. She's just interested in conquering and leaving scorched men's hearts behind her, the ashes of which are cleansed by men's feeble tears over the fact that they will never meet such a woman again. That's what Stephen thought. But it was not so at all. Adriana was very much interested in winning his heart for quite a long time, but he had yet to find out about it. In the meantime, the black kitty waved her graceful hand and disappeared through the door of the store as gracefully as if she were entering a chic Parisian hotel. Why did I think so harshly of her, or it's good? She helps her mother somehow, and she works for little money. Although $500 for coming in the morning and evening was quite a substantial sum. Well, he's still wrong. Everyone has their oddities. That's no reason to be annoyed. You've got to be a little more gentle, the good-natured fellow thought. And the cats that squeaked on his soul during the conversation with Adriana, he attributed to tomorrow's unpleasant conversation with Kevin. But Kevin had called him himself, and again early in the morning. So how's the money coming, or do you want me to help you get a loan? Smirked the curly-haired handsome man on the other side of town, where he lived in his dad's luxurious cottage. Look, let's meet and talk like men. What's the point of playing phone games with them? You're a clown, remember. The only thing you have to say is, "Where do you want the money, dear?" Otherwise you'll be talking to prisoners. He laughed, pleased with his brutality. His smugness. The smirk was felt even through the cell phone connection. Somehow it's always these dads and moms who do some kind of business and pretend to be kings of the mountain. They may be from the mountain, but they are evil kings, Stephen thought. He was terribly sick of this dragging quagmire. Kevin's curveball. I love myself to tears in this cloud of roses, jokingly sang Stephen to himself. And aloud he said that so the conversation will not work. You'll learn to speak properly. Then you can call, and ask one of the drunken servants to call. Oh, why did he say that? It just came out. And he didn't have time to regret it before the phone went off with a profanity-laced blast, which boiled down to this. Besides, I'm great. You're a nobody, and I'll trample on you, and you'll wish you'd never been born. Why did I laugh? And immediately regretted it again. But I couldn't help myself. I mean, Rick didn't call yesterday, so there's nothing he can do. Well, there's no escaping fate, is there? Looks like he's made an enemy. Oh, what kind of VIP status? Oh, come on, cheese. I'm not worthy of such an enemy, he said out loud and laughed again. He laughed because he had to release his tension, and because he had nothing else to do. The first time I caught myself in the habit of laughing at the most inopportune moments was when he was only 5 years old. He and the boys were running for a swim when they went to visit their grandmother in the countryside and got caught in a thunderstorm. The older boys were shaking with fear. The youngest 3-year-old neighbor's toddler didn't understand anything. Stephen was afraid that the older boys would scare him and wanted to calm the little one down. He said, "Look, Rick, this is how we play. These two play cowards, that's their role. And I'm the warlord in our game, the storm. This is the enemy army, and you're my only hero. Your task is to be calm and smile, so that the enemies do not realize that our army is only cowards. And I will distract them. Can you play the silent hero, or are you still too small?" He made on seriousness, looked at the little one. "I can, of course, rejoiced the kid because he was so rarely played with by grown-up boys. Great, see the stick. It works like a magic sword, and you can use it to control the thunderstorm. Say cool. Wow, the young one marveled. Stephen ran out to meet me with the stick and shouted, "Why are there only heroes in my army?" Shouted. He turned around, winked at Rick, and waved his hands, saying, "Well, I exaggerated a little. That's the tactics of battle." The kid understood from a full-mouth grin, and once again nailed the tiny shoulders and spread his legs. After a little thought, menacingly, as he thought, into God's hands. That's how in some cartoon Bo Gator met the serpent Gorinich and someone like that. Stephen went into a frenzy. He ran, he laughed, he waved his stick, left and right, up and down. Rick opened his mouth in admiration, for his father had indeed already taught Stephen some throwing and blocking cards with a stick. And in the eyes of the kid, and in the background of the players, more often than not, thunderstorms, and in a downpour. That one was a real hero. The two older guys stopped shaking and laughed too. One of them said, "Look at you. Stephen, you're our tough pepper." Rick heard and was even more excited. He shouted in what he thought was a mighty Bo Gator voice, though it was actually more like a whispered whisper of delight. "The kid's teammate is still a hero." The commander waved his stick approvingly at the older boys playing above him. I put my finger to my lips, saying, "Do not tell Rick that we are just playing." They nodded and made serious faces. I got even more into the rage, and running up the hill, threatened a stick flash of lightning, and threateningly said, "The commander forbids you." You heard, we still have a hero. To be sure, he knocked an improvised spear on the ground, and spread his arms towards the enemy existing only in the imagination of children of the enemy. The storm clouds were carried away by the wind, and the clouds magically began to disperse. The downpour suddenly turned into just a working rainstorm. But ever since then, Stephen had always laughed when he was in danger. It was the same habit his father had. Their mother. "If you were alive now, I wouldn't be so afraid. Would you tell me what to do now?" Now he was facing danger again. Except that his friend Rick couldn't stand behind him with the look of a bogeyman, and no magic wand to threaten the coming storm. Still, he decided he would remain fearless no matter what happened. Otherwise, who would protect his mother? This desire to protect everyone around him, even the stronger ones, had saved him many times from the worst situations. And he hoped that this time too, the curve of luck would take him in the right direction. But if the curve was going to take him somewhere, then while it went around already in the afternoon of the ill-fated day, he was stopped at the traffic police station and found Pot in the cabin. Of course, he's a complete idiot. He'd seen that the passenger had been unkind this morning. Stephen still wondered why he was moving with such a large suitcase only to the next street. But he could not think that he would put a forbidden potion under the tarpaulin. I got a text from an unfamiliar number. "Good luck to you, Immortal." It was clear who the black mark came from. Mr. Smith Jr. couldn't have forgotten him so easily. He wasn't even allowed to make a phone call and was locked up in a holding cell. The investigator hinted that even if the debts increased by 10 at the end, it was just more reason to apologize to the good man, and something else added reliable people at the banks who lend to everyone. But all this he said in the corridor, and in the interrogation room he asked only appropriate questions. And only at the end he asked in such a way that he decided to follow the letter of the law and wait for a fair decision and call my friend who will find me a lawyer. "You've already used your call. This isn't a telephone exchange," the investigator muttered. "Maybe we can help you tomorrow," he said as he walked him down the hallway, and when he left the interrogation room, he added, "If you live to see it." And he smiled a snaky smile. There was indeed a company of very unpleasant gentlemen in the cell. One man looked a lot like a gorilla. Everyone called him David. David was not albino. He had no eyebrows and no visible eyelashes. But his little red eyes burned with wild anger and readiness to tear anyone apart. Just in the mood. The second gentleman's name was Hunt, though he had nothing in common with the northern peoples. He was a lanky, thin, guttural fellow with eyes that bulged constantly, who came up to Stephen and said the same thing. "What's your problem?" So he repeated several times. And the gorilla, David, smiled not sweetly with iron teeth for some reason and rubbed his knuckles, preparing for some reprisal. And it wasn't hard to guess who. Sebastian, a succulent, skinny, bald man, kept reminding him that he had to wait for a signal from some Delta plan. Apparently the signal hadn't come yet, because no one had made a move until tonight. He was ready to fight them at any moment, wasn't he? Except he wouldn't be the one to start the fight. Let them go first. He even wanted a release. His muscles were humming with tension. He would have loved to correct the gentlemen's faces, but for some reason they wouldn't come to him. In the evening, the escort dropped by, brought iron plates with some kind of pasta-like mass, and whispered, "Hey, Sebastian." Here Sebastian left the cell and they went somewhere. David didn't burn. Finally, he found the ability to speak and turned to Kant. "Listen, what's that? I'm tense." He waved me away. "I don't understand what the hell is going on." Nothing more happened that night. But Stephen stayed up all night and was ready to defend himself. He wasn't scared for some reason. But in fact, a lot of things changed at that time in the fate of the guy. Rick had been in a state of flux for 24 hours. He called his buddy, who was in neutral and even rather friendly relations with the local authorities. But of course, he had enough sense to address not to that group, which belonged to the honorable gentleman, father, and son. Nor did he turn to his competitors, for although he had already taken part in a large-scale victory over the storm at the age of 3 thanks to Stephen, he was, well, let's say, not a coward, but just a very circumspect young man. And he was also going to live a long time. So he asked to speak to the gentleman who controlled both the noble societies of Messrs. Smith and their direct competitors, or rather to one of them, a hang glider friend of his father Stephen, who still dwelt in Surgut. Rick did not consult Stephen. He knew ahead of time that he had to respect his mother's position and all that. But he also guessed that his mother would hardly prefer to wear gears all her life, or to bury him in the city cemetery next to his father. "Oh, I don't like all these ladies' explanations here, brother. It's about your hide. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to consult with you. Otherwise, as long as we're like young ladies, we'll have nothing to solve and no one to save." That was Rick's reasoning. His character was a rare combination of extremely down-to-earth and cautious man, and devoted friendship, who for a friend is ready and in fire and water. He simply couldn't do otherwise. After all, Stephen repelled him from bullies, and thanks to him, he stopped dabbling in potions in time. And most of their peers are no longer alive. And if they are, they're just shells, who live like that, sick, unhappy, angry at everything and everyone. Teenagers. Yeah, the potion sucks everything human out of a person. He's living a good life. He's got enough bread and butter, sometimes even caviar. He will never forget how he and his mother took him to live with them from his drunken parents, who were in jail for stealing. And where would he go when his grandmother was gone? There was nowhere for him to go. He knew some orphanage kids who were always running off and crouching in the city, in Cabbie to steal something. He didn't want to get there ever. He wouldn't forget their eyes that were forever searching for those who would save them against all odds, from themselves. And now it was time. It was his turn to protect the rear. And he would do it. With that sentiment, he passed a note to Uncle Robert through the liaison. And though he had been warned that the wait was likely to be long, within an hour he received a call from none other than the very Uncle Robert in whose place Uncle John, his friend's father, had died. "Rick, are you there?" There was a cheerful voice in the receiver. It was as if they had parted just yesterday. They were over 10 years ago when he had seen him at Uncle John's funeral. "I'm Uncle Robert. I need your help," he shouted into the phone in a childlike voice. And he was surprised himself. "Yeah, I got it. I'm on my way. I'll call his mother in the morning. You called his Kathy. They're worried about where their son's gone." I did, of course, but I didn't say anything about jail yet. He was hoping for you, said it was urgent on the phone. But he forgot me. Good for you. You're smart. You approved. Uncle Robert, thank you for responding so quickly. But I'm worried about how he's gonna be until morning. That Smith Jr. is a rabid jackal, not a human being. I wasn't born yesterday, son. You're insulting me. I didn't tell him I'm going in person, that I'm gonna be hated. but nobody's gonna touch it. Don't you worry. One more thing. You're good for calling. I always wanted to do something for John's family. Yeah, his wife's pissed at me. Anyway, you wait." At the last words, his voice trembled, and there was a sudden cheer from inside the gallery. "Here it is, the magic stick with which we will defeat the storm. It's on its way. Rick, I wanted to tell my friend, and the connections in prison allowed me to do it. But since the hang glider, Uncle Robert, asked me not to make a fuss, that's the way to do it. After all, according to his information, the hang glider was feared. Even the most important thing in the most important city managed to team he worked for some big shot. First as a bodyguard, then as an assistant. Defend some oil and gas resources in Yamal. But most importantly, Uncle Robert kept in touch with all the elders of the oil and gas business. And those knew a lot and made sure that this knowledge did not leave with them before time. Do you realize where? Del Taplin simply tolerated people like Smith and others like them in their regions. After all, someone else is going to take their place. But if it was necessary, it would be easy to find an alternative to them. If their place became vacant again due to the departure of these very unpleasant gentlemen to the next world, or just to meet their native offshore, it's a good morning after all. So thought Stephen when the escort timidly said, "You may be free. Citizen, we have cleared up the misunderstanding," and so to speak, apologized for the inconvenience. Then he chuckled and added, "A comrade has already come to pick you up. I'll show you out." When I heard about the comrade, he felt uncomfortable that he was just going to be quietly removed. Or was Rick able to use his connections? But it turns out there was a stranger waiting for him. Broad-shouldered, gray-haired. He reminded me of someone. But he was familiar with potatoes, and a grudging lip that reminded him of something important and familiar. "Uncle Robert is not sure," stretched Stephen. "Who else is a fool?" "To him you look like John, you look like a jolly bass," he replied. They did not go straight home. First, they talked at the hotel. There they had fresh clothes and a good dinner ready for Stephen. "You see, Stephen, I want to help because I need it." It's not even a question of whether you need it or not. It was like Uncle Robert had read Stephen's mind. He wanted to thank him for getting him out of jail, but he didn't want to accept money for his mother's treatment and a new apartment. "Well, Robert, Uncle Robert, I'm a grown man myself. I've already saved up for the operation. What am I supposed to do? Disrespect myself? You've been such a great help with the worms. We've only finished the first act so far. They're gonna come after us from behind. I know them so well, I'll have to put you under surveillance for at least a year or two. Either move to my place in Surgat. You'll be under my full protection. As a man to a man, I understand you. If something like this happened to my friend, I'd do everything I could for his family. But my mother's not going anywhere. How do you expect me to explain that I have money for treatment in Germany? How could a cab driver have saved it? Logical. All right, let's make a deal. You go home and don't worry about a thing. I'll put your Rick on the stakeout. It'll give him a paycheck. Your mother won't suspect a thing. He's there. He comes to visit you sometimes. Yeah, that's great. But before treatment, you'll have to bring equipment and a doctor to Tumen." "What, directly from Germany?" "Yes, it's just a question of money. It's not a problem. And please don't make me make excuses. I'm not an angel, Stephen. Far from it. I've had my share of bad luck, but I'm not the worst person. I have a conscience, and a sense of duty to your father, too. Uncle Robert, Dad. He said something about me in the last days of his life. Yeah, he said you were a little kid, but you were a real fighter. I wanted you to go into the big game. But I think you're going to have something more important to look forward to after we talk. Hey, you got a girlfriend? You gonna get married, but you're just like my mom. No, girls, I'm the only one. First, I have to cure my mother, provide for her, and then start a family. And I don't like anyone. Well, you're right about that. You have to choose your wife seriously. I'm sorry, I was just asking an old man's question. I wanted to know more about you. And I need to figure out a way to get my bodyguard Christina to stay with you and your mother. Look, she has to leave in an hour, but I'll call you as soon as it's done. The mom's surgery and Smith. There's one other thing that's been bothering me. I don't want to tell you about it until I've cleared it all up. He wasn't a prude and understood perfectly well that he would have done the same if he were his father's friend. He wanted to know more about his father, how they served, and everything he could, but realized that it would already be too much for one meeting after a long break. From that point on, life was booming. Rick started dropping by almost every day, and while his mother went to the neighbors for tea, he installed tiny matchbook-sized cameras everywhere. The next day in the evening told his mother a little bit. "You're not gonna help me with my love life." Willie Rick, sputtering in a smile, winked at Stephen. "I will, of course. You're my second son. What do you have to do?" Stephen's mom smiled. Like most women, she loved to arrange the happy fates of newlyweds, and secretly hoped that Stephen would finally get married. It will happen to her, and how he will be alone. Yes, and grandchildren want to have time to see. Of course, all mothers dream of that, and she's no exception. Anyway, there's a blonde nurse from Tumen. She's temporarily interning with us. Just a golden girl, beautiful, kind, and smart. And struck me in the heart. She can't afford to pay for her room, and she's going to live in the dorms. But it would be great if you could rent her a room and she could look after you in return. After the word "cared for," the mother waved her hands in protest. A little different. But for me, please pretend for at least a month that you are ill. Demand tea and measure your blood pressure. That sort of thing. But after all, my happiness is worth it. Rick smiled the most charming of smiles. "Oh, you're a scoundrel. But I can't resist your charm. All right, I'll be patient. I've already got Stephen all worked up about Adriana. I tell him I don't need help, but she keeps coming and coming." All with some kind of manufactured smile. Everybody praises me like I'm some crazy old broad. But I don't need pity, and I'm not sick. I could probably do a lot of plowing. Got it. If I were to make nails out of these people, these nails wouldn't be any stronger. But Christina is really nice. You'll like her, Rick summed it up. When Stephen went to see him off, he asked directly Olia, "Is this the same Christina bodyguard that Uncle Robert was talking about?" "How did you know?" "But I didn't doubt it. You should thank me." I took the fire and slipped Cabbie in. Bodyguards, nurses in one guardian's face. Was I surprised? Why would Mom need a bodyguard? Well, brother, there's more than one reason. Everything you need to know. My uncles were definitely on your side. Rick has yet to thank you once for daring to go hang gliding. Well, I mean, Uncle Robert. I know how risky it was. No one else would ever do that for me. I'll never forget it. Oh, come on. I'm the only rich man in your army. You've forgotten. Here they both remembered the childhood victory over the storm and laughed like boys. 2 days later, Christina appeared, tall, strong, and athletic. The girl took the third room, which had been empty since her father's death, and blended into their family very harmoniously. Mother could not be pleased, and all the time said Christina. Then Christina say. It was obvious that she liked the girl. Christina, as it was supposed, according to her legend, sometimes went to work, but the floor above the apartment rented a sporty-looking man who regularly looked at what was going on in the apartment. A couple of other inconspicuous people accompanied Stephen even to the store. At the same time, Uncle Robert had arranged for a brilliant surgeon to come from Germany for some crazy money by the standards of an ordinary person, although he was assured that it was possible to find a specialist in Russia. But he was stubborn and trusted only those he knew personally or those recommended by acquaintances. When there was a month left before the operation, Christina was instructed to delicately start a conversation with Stephen's mother about the fact that a luminary from Germany was coming to Tumen, and that this surgeon was ready to perform the operation free of charge for several people, so that doctors could learn some new technologies in surgery. The special operation was fine-tuned by the Delta plan to perfection. Indeed, they took a dozen more free patients for treatment, and even convened a press conference, at which Dr. Klaus Link told about the suddenly arisen burning desire to share with colleagues experience in prosthetic heart valves in people with congenital heart disease. And he invited surgeons at his level to apply to be present during the operations. The doctors could not understand anything, but several applications were submitted. Even a famous surgeon from Moscow came and warmly supported the initiative of his German colleague to perform operations on a charitable basis and contribute to science. Thus, by the time Cabbie arrived, Stephen's mother had already gathered a whole concilium of excellent surgeons. And since she was placed in one of the several wards of what she thought was a charitable ward, it could not have occurred to her that it was her husband's friend, assisted by his sons and his adopted son, who wished to do her good, even against her will. She shared joyfully with her neighbor in the ward, one of whom was also a teacher of Russian literature. But they say that there are no good people left in the world. They exist both in the West and in Russia. It's just that not enough is said about them. If you and I were not in this ward, we wouldn't believe it. That such a thing could happen. You don't say, so did the roommate. I applied to be reimbursed for part of the surgery as a disabled and honored teacher. And then all of a sudden there's such joy. They say it's free of charge. I thought there was only one good surgeon here, but I'm met by a whole panel. And all for free. Travel and accommodation treatment. After all, the government takes care of us. We shouldn't be cursing the government. That's what I'm saying. Cabbie agreed with her. The thing is that journalists tell us only about all sorts of nasty things about good people. It's rare to find a single word. The women also continued to praise the increasing humanity and humanity in society. Other patients with them in the ward. There was also a nanny from the daycare center, and the poor also joined in this optimistic talk and were happily preparing for the quote-unquote charity surgery. Somewhere behind the scenes, Delta Plane continued to realize his dream of making life better for the family of his deceased friend. He didn't look like an angel at all and felt extremely awkward and unaccustomed in this role. He was worried not only about the vengeful Smith, but also about his friend's secret, which he had promised never to give out to anyone. The fact is that John was not just served in the paratroopers. He was a long-time personal bodyguard of a very influential general. That was his part-time job in Surrogate, and the latter instructed him to keep important papers, which contained a lot of dirt on the currently active persons from the world, power, and business. And in their last meeting, he asked Robert to burn those papers as soon as he had a chance. But Christina couldn't find the right secret door in his room. And John had marked exactly where it should be on the plan. And now that Cabbie was in surgery, Stephen was at work. A whole team was to be sent there to search the apartment, find the documents, and destroy them. The hang glider directed the operation remotely, and when the group was already ready to stealthily penetrate the entranceway, the apartment suddenly came in. Opened it with her own key, the neighbor Adriana. The group was given a perfect signal. They started watching the girl. Didn't know about John's secret. But how? After all, the friend told only him. And even his son and wife were forbidden to talk about these documents. Everyone froze in surprise. But Adriana went into the room where Christina now lived, whom the neighbor thought was at work. She went to the kitchen and took the painkiller from the refrigerator that Cabbie always drank. Then Adriana carefully opened the lid and put something from the netting on it. Christina had been signaled not to leave the room or reveal herself, so she waited patiently. Then she took the medicine and urgently handed it over to the laboratory for examination. Already by evening, it became known why Stephen's mom's condition had deteriorated dramatically in the last 2 years, so that sometimes she couldn't even get up. The insidious neighbor for some reason added a potent drug, which with a weak heart should slowly but surely kill Cabbie. But why is she still alive, and why? Or is it necessary to kill her? Smith could not understand, for the deterioration had been going on for 2 years, and the conflict had occurred only recently. This mystery was yet to be solved. In the meantime, Christina simply replaced the medication with a normal one, and they postponed the resolution of this issue until a little later. The mysterious door that John had indicated on the plan could not be found. It simply wasn't there. But the clue came from an unexpected direction. Rick ran through the database of the owners of all the apartments in the house and hit the mark. Another apartment belonged to the late John. However, in the last 15 years, it had another owner, Slaga, who lived right across the street from the neighboring building. He knew Clara. She was a cook at the military school. When he and John were students, she had no children, and for some reason she thought John was her son. At the time, the woman lived in a tiny dorm room, and also worked part-time as an actor at the school. The hang glider had easily persuaded Slag to give permission to search one of the rooms that were connected by a wall to Stephen's father's apartment. Of course, Robert. That's what John said. Don't come in here again until Robert gets here. That's the terms we agreed on. And he left a suitcase for you, and you just kept coming and coming. I was afraid I was gonna die. It turned out that the door from John's room went straight through the entrance wall, and he could be in another apartment without leaving his room. But the door indicated on the plan was disguised in niches. And a little later, about 6 years after his father's death, Stephen decided to make repairs and level the wall. That's why under a layer of cement and could not find the desired object. There were no documents in this apartment, but there were dollars and euros in an ordinary suitcase. And a note, friend, if you found this suitcase, I'm dead for some reason. Keep a third of the money if you have money problems. The rest, figure out a way to give it to my family. The general exchanged his papers for the money, even though I didn't ask for any payment. I took the money so that I wouldn't upset Nadia anymore and wouldn't have to go on dangerous business trips. The rest is in the letter. In the letter, he left instructions for his wife. And also in the envelope was a huge number of family photos with his son and wife. So much for John. All things considered. Even after his death, Robert said to himself, he decided to give his third of the money to Clara. He learned from the conversation that his daughter, who had managed to cure herself of years of alcoholism, was coming to visit her. The woman spent all her savings on this treatment, and her daughter is unlikely to be able to work. Come on, Robert, I got the apartment anyway. I thought you'd come sooner or later, and I'd have to give the place to you or your wife. I never counted on the money. I had it lying around waiting for you. What took you so long? What to do, Clara? In your life, if there are straight paths, they don't lead to good things. You can keep the apartment and keep the money, but hide it from your daughter. What if he goes back to his old ways? Put it in an account and everything. If there's a problem, you know the phone number now. She gladly accepted the money because at last her prodigal daughter, who had been singing for many years and living wherever and with whomever she could, would return. But suddenly she decided to get smart. She told Robert with delight how happy she was. Because God heard her prayers and helped her daughter. You know what a talented and vulnerable girl my Nina is. But is it her fault that her fate turned out this way? After all, sins accumulate in the family, and then in someone else's unhappy fate spill out. Can I condemn my own soul? And Robert only marveled at how infinitely patient mothers can be, and the other would report back. She'd make conditions, say things like I gave birth to you, and you ruined my whole life. But all that mattered to this mother was that her daughter was alive and well and remembered her. She saw not a woman by a bum with a broken fate, and do not disgrace the mother Lida. No, her daughter was still to her a pure and innocent girl, who was just a little unlucky, but eventually she got her head on straight. And the rest is anyone's business. Kathy's surgery, like the other patients, went well. Of course, we had to wait another 6 months to be sure there would be no complications. But the prognosis was good. Rick didn't have to tell about his father's secret, or Adriana's plans, or the fact that Smith Jr. had sworn to his friends that he would take revenge on Stephen's face, even at the cost of his own life. And Rick believed that for such a wastrel ambition was more precious than life. After all, if you have not gained a mind to 50 years, it is too late to hope. Smith Sr. was categorically not going to pay for something at the cost of his life or even his cottage. That's why he was ready to leave at any moment to his native offshore. If his son went completely off the rails, he'd even leave them the cottage. Let them pay for their mistakes. He can still make another son better and smarter. After all, he's only 71. Thought he was a man in his prime. With all that money. Nowadays, with money, medicine works wonders. At the same time, Adriana was on the phone to her mother. Mom, I did everything you asked. Prepare a deed of gift to me and a big cuckoo to my delicious clean-up loser. Father, I'm not dead yet. You know how much I hate her. She stole the love of my life from me in high school and ended up a widow. Serves me right. Bitch of a mom. She's gonna die. She's gonna die. Where's she gonna go? She's gotten a lot worse. I can't come over more often. and her son's a fool, doesn't respond to me. And now some big girl has moved in. I could barely get into the apartment. You do what you do, you get what you get. Adriana did not know that from the neighboring apartment, her phone was conveniently tapped, and did not see from the dropped jaws of Christina and Rick, who were listening very carefully to this amazing dialogue. There was nothing surprising about the conversation. It was just that Adriana's mother was a psychopath, but not figuratively speaking, but in the real sense of the word. She had almost served her time for grand larceny and robbery and wanted a gift, as she called it herself by the time of her release. And that gift was the death of a high school friend. Kathy considered Adriana's mom a friend, and she hated her. She even accidentally pushed her down the stairs once in 4th grade. Well, God had put the brakes on. What did Betty call her classmate? I don't get it. She was beating all the guys off her, and the pretty, smart, and brave guys loved it. But the only guys who ever got the edge were the sissies or the scoundrels. She didn't realize that like attracts like, and I thought it was an injustice. And then John showed up, and no matter what she did, he just grinned and anticipated all her mischief. That's when she really fell in love. She wanted to get this generous, kind, handsome, and brave guy at any cost. She longed for him as a hungry crocodile, dreaming of eating a huge zebra that came to the watering hole. And although the predator sees the zebra as an ugly animal, just a piece of meat, but it is still passion. That's the feeling Taylor had towards John. But in the end, that fool got him, and she'll never forgive that. And everybody was feeling sorry for the fool. Like she's gonna die soon and all that. But this grenade creaks and creaks, and he dares to pity her. He writes silly, snotty letters and even carries her packages. Good thing she doesn't know Adriana's her daughter. And Adriana, she has the same grip and understands what is the main thing in life. But the son went to one of the mumbles of his father. Who was her son's father? Betty didn't really know, but probably that nurse from the emergency room. After all, the son became a pediatrician. He says, "Mom, thank you for giving birth to me." But the real mom is the one who gives love too. Or at least she doesn't hate it. And that puppy's got a point. Of course, she'll never leave them anything in her life. But let Adriana tense up and think she had competition. Betty didn't know that her plans were never going to come true again. What to do? Some little things cut through an obstacle to other little things so hardened that obstacles simply bypass them, and they never have to be taken out of their sheaths at all. Referring to the former swords, she to the latter. Each of the women in her own way fought hard for happiness. Only the methods and goals were quite different. At the same time, Christina the family bodyguard and Rick the family friend were facing Christina now. Another question, what to do? And they came to the conclusion that to tell about the betrayal of a friend to Stephen's mom is definitely not worth it. After all, she had just had heart surgery, but Stephen had to tell Adriana and her mom. Not only did he have to tell her, but even give him a tape recorder and a recording. I mean, he's not a shy guy. He worked with Rick in the Human Detective Agency for 4 years and successfully. The next day, Stephen invited Adriana to his house and gave her the dictaphone recording. A conversation with her mother showed a video of her replacing her mother's medication and a copy of the lab report. That's illegal. You can't prove anything. Mean. Black cat. I don't need to prove anything, Stephen replied calmly. You know where my friend works. We've done some digging on you and your mom. Stephen deliberately used words that the young woman could understand, because she obviously didn't understand the nice way. And he pulled out a whole pile of documents prepared by Rick, which showed that the patients, where Adriana was a nurse, too quickly and often died. And almost on the day of the funeral, Adriana's account had suddenly been credited with a substantial sum from a relative who was a direct heir. As for Mom, there was enough material there for several life sentences. How many? Coldly, arrogantly, asked Adriana. How long what? How long will you do? Clarified Stephen. How much compensation do you want for the moral and other damage done? But you got it. Although personally I do not understand why you cling to your mother. She'll die, what will you have left? You're young, live in your own pleasure, and be happy. That's not good. Stephen had never been so close to hitting a woman. But he held back. "Adriana, you don't need anything. Tomorrow I'll hand over all the documents to the proper place and you won't hurt anyone else. She did, and so did your mother. And the rest is not my problem." Adriana pounced on him and wanted to scratch his eyes out with her long manicure, but he just took her by the hair and moved her gently out the door, telling her not to get in my face again, "You stupid idiot." He really couldn't find any other definition for such a moral invalid. After all, Adriana did not understand normal human speech, or rather, did not respond to it seriously. Everyone who spoke was not like her and her mother without aggression. Malikov slowed you down. And these are still the mildest definitions that mother and daughter picked up for normal people, because the standard of normality for some strange reason considered only themselves. What can we do? There are invalids with a body, and there are invalids with a soul. And secondly, if anyone can cure them, it's the Lord God. And not always. You have to want this healing at least a little bit. And people like Adriana will wait for death, close apartments, revenge, passion, money, power, and there's nothing you can do about it. But mother get well, and Stephen also saw that Rick and Christina really liked each other. He had once declared her his dream girl to create a legend for Kathy, and now they're really getting married. Uncle Robert used to scare Stephen Smith, but amidst the general happiness, the guy didn't take it seriously. And he should have, because jackals attack unexpectedly, and then one day it happened. Stephen was still working in a cab. Uncle Robert had not yet told him about the money and did not show him his father's letters. Wanted to give the kid time to adjust, and things seemed to be getting better. Adriana promptly sold the apartment and stopped showing up. The realtor gave her the keys. And on top of those worries, she was also regularly called in to the coroner's office about suspicious deaths of her former charges. Rick was getting ready to marry Christina. Smith Sr. had safely departed for some island abroad and had forgotten about Stephen and his troubles forever. Only Smith Jr. continued to grind his teeth on Stephen. One day, Stephen was called to order, and while he was looking for change for a passenger in the dashboard drawer, he threw a blindfold over the back of his uniform and tied his hands together. The guy moved behind the wheel. It wasn't a long drive to Smith Jr.'s cottage. Stephen was in a heavy sleep. He sought his father again. It's everywhere. People running and shooting again. I want to cover him with myself. Dad's yelling again, and the angel shows signs that it's time. But this time he managed to hear what the father was shouting. Don't give up until the end. Do what you can, even if it seems like you can't do anything else. You hear that, son? Stephen was somehow a little boy in a dream again. He started nodding and reaching for his father with his little hands. But he smiled and said, "You're early. It's time for me to get up. Get up, son. In the morning." That's how his father woke him up in the morning, and he couldn't even draw the line between dream and reality. And he woke up in the trunk of the car, which was going somewhere on his luck, and his hands were tied behind him, and he was lying with his back to the top. So he fumbled in his pocket for the small piece of plastic Rick had given him, a Swiss set that included a tiny knife and a small screwdriver. With incredible effort, he tensed and relaxed the muscles in his arms again and gratefully remembered his father, who had talked about continuing to exercise every day, no matter what mood you got up in. You see, son, every man is still to some extent a primitive hunter. We've got to keep our bodies toned. Otherwise, fear gets in the body. And if it's in the body, it crawls into the head and then into the soul. So it's time. Morning. Get up, son. So his father said the same thing over and over again in different variations. And really, Stephen was never afraid of anything, except losing his mother and not doing his best for her. And sometimes he was afraid for Rick when he was young and got into trouble, but he wasn't afraid for himself. Those who had already won just have to take the last step. He told himself, just get out of the car. What did his father say in the dream? Don't give up. Don't give up until the end. He felt it himself. If he hesitated a little longer, he'd never regain his strength and determination. Some book written by a concentration camp survivor. He had read as a child that many people tend to give up. Things are never good. And when things are almost good, If they have been through a long, hard period before, they just can't believe that things can get better. And they die for no reason in front of an almost victory. He's doing well. The mother had surgery. Adriana won't hurt her anymore. He's out of jail and has a solid shoulder in Uncle Robert. And Rick has finally found personal happiness. How can he give up on Smith now? The spoiled son of a bloodthirsty dad? No way. Dad died protecting a friend. And if he's gonna die for a worthy cause and for people like him. Or just to die surrounded by his grandchildren. He's got a lot to live for. I mean, it's all good now. Almost. You can't give up. You can't fight to the end, even if it seems futile. With such thoughts, microscopic movements, he quailed into the ropes. And when the blinding sunlight hit him in the face, someone opened the trunk. He jumped out of the trunk like a spring with his whole body and hit the head of the person who opened the trunk right in the stomach. He collapsed in surprise and sat up, but the guards were already running to the car and the gate where it was supposed to enter. The car was already closed open, left only the gate. Apparently, through it came out the guard personally to check the composition of the passengers and opened the trunk. Unfortunately, the guards were already too close, and he was completely unarmed. They were yelling and waving their arms. There was nowhere to run. There was a plane ahead and only Smith's house behind him. And they had already grabbed him and taken him to Smith Jr. "What's up, boy?" "Here we are. It's a pleasure." Curly-haired beauty. I didn't even talk about the player. What was there to say? Yes, he lost. Masked guards. They dragged him to the house of his worst enemy. And who should he look at to make him talk? Smith Jr. chuckled mockingly, turning to the older masked thug, who swung around and delivered a crushing blow. But not Stephen, but Smith. While the curly-haired man flailed his eyes and couldn't understand the thing, the big man took off the mask, and under it was the face of one of the guards who had become familiar to Stephen at his house. The second one was Christina. He would not have been surprised if under one of the masks was Robert or Rick. And so it was. 3 days later, the whole company was discussing what had happened. "Rick, how could you put a tracker in just your phone? At your mercy, we were racing down the track behind another car and almost lost Stephen." The hang glider was indignant. "Yes, I was just putting it that way. I didn't realize that Stephen dropped his phone on his car, and then it would be driven away, and he'd be taken to another car." Rick justified himself. "It's okay, honey. I'll teach you everything during our married life." Christina smirked and, smiling slyly, showed everyone present her wedding ring. Of course, no one ever told Kathy about the fact that sometimes humanism in society should be stimulated by money. After all, she had made new friends at the hospital. And the fact that Adriana had decided to sell the apartment didn't surprise her, of course. What would she do in such a small town? She'd always been drawn to the capital. Kathy never found out that Adriana was her walking death. Nor did the woman find out whose daughter the neighbor's daughter really was. Didn't find out about her school friend's hatred either. But that didn't matter, considering how much that sentence had been extended. As a result of the new evidence of the crimes, unlikely to ever bother Kathy, but that he had been rescued by Uncle Robert, Stephen had told his mother, and she hadn't bothered to specify by what coincidence he'd been there. She was satisfied with the explanation that he had just dropped in to visit Rick. After all the old grudges were no longer important. The main thing was that her boys were alive and well. Now Rick's getting married, and Stephen will be along for the ride. And then the grandchildren. "Son, here's what I'm thinking. Let's move to a big city, to Tumen. I have new friends there now, whom I met at the operation. And I didn't know that my father asked my mother to do that in the letter Robert gave me. He asked her to start a new life in a place where nothing reminded her of the old, and explained in detail that the money given to her and her son was honestly earned. The husband knew how sensitive his wife was about such matters. And in the letter to Stephen he only wrote, 'I love you, my son very much,' and enclosed all the photographs of his mother and Stephen himself. There were over 100 of them. Couldn't have been a better gift from a father. 'Where did you put Smith Jr.? Stephen asked. "Oh, don't worry about him. The old wisdom of Daddy hung all his machinations on his son and came out clean. So Kevin will have a very long time to think about justice. 15 years at least. Rick laughed.